Hey, you. Yes, you. Listen closely because I don't think you fully grasp what just happened. You're sitting there, acting like you made some regular decision, like you responded normally, like you handled things the way any average person would. But the people who saw you today, the ones who were watching you closely, they're still replaying that moment, trying to understand how someone like you managed to flip an entire scenario with one move that didn't even look like a move. You didn't swing, you didn't force, you didn't react, you didn't struggle, you didn't even raise your voice. You just placed one cold, precise, strategic action on the table. One step that felt so casual at first, but underneath it was the kind of execution only people with real internal discipline can pull off. That wasn't instinct. That wasn't impulse. That wasn't luck. That was the type of decision someone makes when they're done negotiating their worth, and you made it like it was nothing. The part that everyone else expected was chaos. They thought you would get rattled, pressured, pushed into a corner where you'd start explaining yourself, defending yourself, backpedaling, bending to maintain the peace, or shrinking to avoid confrontation. That's the version of you they were counting on, the older version. The version they still think exists because they're stuck in some outdated mental picture of who you used to be.
Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones barely holding themselves together in silence. You see them laughing, working, replying normally, but inside there is something collapsing every single day. And the terrifying part is, they become so good at hiding it. Even they forget how damaged they really are. I think that is why lonely people stare into nothing for so long. They are not daydreaming. They are fighting memories. A sentence someone said years ago, a betrayal nobody apologized for, a moment that embarrassed them so deeply, their soul never fully recovered from it. People underestimate emotional exhaustion. Physical pain screams, emotional pain whispers, and whispers are dangerous because they stay longer. You can distract yourself from sadness for a few hours. Music, noise, crowds, fake smiles. But eventually the night returns, and there you are again, alone with your thoughts. Alone with the feeling that life kept taking pieces of you without giving them back. That feeling changes people. It makes them quieter, colder, more distant. Not evil, just tired. Very tired. And yet, human beings are strange creatures. Even after everything, they still continue. Even after heartbreak, they continue. Even after betrayal, they continue. Even after nights filled with overthinking so loud it feels like torture, they continue. Because somewhere deep inside the human spirit, there is a stubbornness that refuses to die. That is why your worst nights never remain your entire life. Feelings move, pain shifts, wounds scar over. Slowly, painfully, but they do. One morning you wake up, and the thing that once destroyed your sleep barely controls your mind anymore. Not because you forgot, no. You simply became stronger than what once consumed you. And that changes everything. And do you know what makes healing so confusing? It does not happen all at once. There is no dramatic moment, no music, no perfect sunrise where suddenly everything feels okay again. No. Sometimes healing looks pathetic. Sometimes it is just you surviving one more night without falling apart. Sometimes it is forcing yourself to eat when your chest feels empty. Sometimes it is staring at old messages, then finally putting the phone down. People think strength is loud, but honestly, real strength is quiet. It is waking up exhausted and still continuing anyway. It is carrying memories that still hurt without letting them poison your soul completely. And trust me, there are people walking around right now, smiling normally, while fighting battles inside their own heads that would destroy weaker minds. That is why you should never mock silent people. You do not know what they survived privately. Some people became mature because life sat them down and broke their heart repeatedly until they finally understood reality. They learned that attachment can disappear overnight, that promises can evaporate, that humans sometimes leave without even explaining why. And still, the human soul adapts, slowly, painfully, but it adapts. One day, the memories stop stabbing as deeply. One day, your breathing becomes lighter. One day, the same darkness that once terrified you becomes something you can sit beside calmly. Not because you stopped caring, but because suffering taught you endurance. And maybe that is the hidden truth about hard times. They do not only hurt you, they reveal you. They show you how much pain you can survive without completely losing yourself. So if your mind feels tired tonight, if your heart feels unbearably heavy, keep going quietly. Even this version of pain will eventually weaken. You know, some nights are dangerous not because of what happens around you, but because of what happens inside your own head. The overthinking, the replaying, the endless conversations you wish went differently. The human mind is cruel when it becomes exhausted. It drags old wounds out of the grave, then forces you to stare at them again and again. And the worst part? Half the time, you blame yourself for things that were never fully your fault. You wonder if you were too emotional, too available, too kind, too forgiving. But sometimes, you simply gave your heart to people who did not know how to carry it carefully. That is not weakness. That is tragedy. There are people who slowly destroy others emotionally, then act confused when the person becomes distant afterward, as if pain leaves no scars, as if betrayal disappears politely. No, some wounds change the way a human being sees the entire world. After enough disappointment, you stop expecting permanence. You stop believing every smile, every promise, every sweet word whispered during temporary emotions. Because reality teaches harsh lessons. People leave, situations change, feelings fade. And eventually you understand, nothing stays untouched forever. Not happiness, not sadness, not even grief. That is why broken people sometimes become calmer with time. Not because life suddenly became beautiful, but because exhaustion finally teaches acceptance. You stop fighting every memory. You stop reopening every wound. You stop asking why everything happened the way it did. And strangely, that is when breathing becomes easier again. The chest still hurts sometimes. The memories still return sometimes, but they no longer control every second of your existence. And honestly, that quiet progress matters more than people realize. Surviving mentally matters. Getting through another dark night matters. Continuing while emotionally tired matters. So if nobody told you this recently, I am proud of the part of you that kept going, even while secretly struggling. There are memories that do not leave loudly. They stay in small things. A certain hour of the night, a song, a smell, a sentence somebody says without realizing what it awakens inside you. And suddenly, your chest feels heavy again. Not because you are weak, not because you failed to move on, but because human beings are not machines. We remember emotionally. That is the curse of having a deep heart. You can understand something logically and still hurt from it emotionally. You can tell yourself it is over. You can tell yourself they did not deserve your loyalty. And still, part of you mourns what could have been. That part hurts quietly. Especially at night. Especially when the world slows down enough for hidden emotions to crawl back to the surface. That is why lonely nights feel longer than normal days. Because silence removes distractions. And once distractions disappear, people are forced to face themselves. Their regrets, their disappointments, their fears. Most people are terrified of silence for that exact reason. Silence reveals things noise keeps hidden. It reveals how tired you really are, how much pressure you have been carrying privately, how badly you wanted somebody to understand you without needing an explanation. But life does not always give closure. Sometimes people disappear without apologizing. Sometimes love ends without fairness. Sometimes pain arrives without warning. And still, human beings continue somehow. That is what makes the human spirit frighteningly strong. Even after emotional destruction, it still searches for light again. Even after betrayal, it still wants connection again. Even after nights filled with sadness so heavy it becomes physical, the heart still keeps beating. That matters more than you think. Because survival is not always dramatic. Sometimes survival is simply refusing to let darkness turn you into someone completely empty. And honestly, if you are still here fighting your thoughts, instead of surrendering to them completely, then there is already strength inside you. Maybe exhausted strength, maybe damaged strength, but strength. And one day, you will look back at this version of yourself with compassion instead of pain. You know what people rarely admit? Sometimes, the hardest battle in life is not making money, not becoming successful, not proving people wrong. Sometimes the hardest battle is simply staying emotionally alive after everything you experienced. Because pain changes the nervous system. It changes the way you react to voices, to disappointment, to silence, to being ignored. A deeply hurt person can smile normally while internally preparing for abandonment every single day. That kind of exhaustion is invisible. Nobody applauds it. Nobody sees the mental war behind your calm face. They only see the version of you that kept functioning. Not the nights, not the shaking breaths, not the overthinking, not the moments where you sat alone trying to calm your own mind because nobody else knew how. And eventually, something inside you matures painfully. You stop expecting people to save you emotionally. That realization hurts at first, a lot, because every human being secretly wants comfort, understanding, safety. But life teaches some people to become their own emotional shelter. That is why certain souls become quieter with age. Not boring, not empty, just careful. Careful with attachment, careful with trust, careful with how much of themselves they reveal to the world, because they learned how quickly kindness can be misunderstood or exploited. And honestly, there is something deeply tragic about becoming emotionally strong. The stronger you become, the less people realize how much pain created that strength. Nobody sees the sleepless nights behind wisdom. Nobody sees the heartbreak behind emotional control. Nobody sees how many times you almost broke completely before becoming calm. Calm people are not always peaceful people. Sometimes they are simply people who survived enough chaos to stop reacting loudly. That silence, that distant look in their eyes, it usually has a history behind it. A history they rarely explain. Because explaining pain repeatedly becomes exhausting after a while. So eventually, you carry it quietly. You carry the memories quietly, the grief quietly, the disappointment quietly. And step by step, the wound stops bleeding as heavily as before. Not because it vanished, but because time slowly teaches the heart how to survive around the scar. That is what healing truly looks like. Not forgetting, not magically becoming happy forever. No. Healing is reaching a point where the memory no longer controls your breathing, where the sadness no longer owns every hour of your night, where you can finally sit in silence without feeling destroyed by your own thoughts. And maybe that day arrives slower than people expect. Maybe it takes months, maybe years. But emotional storms cannot remain violent forever. Even storms become tired eventually. So if your soul feels heavy tonight, if your mind feels trapped inside old pain, please understand this carefully. The version of you suffering right now is not the final version of you. One day, your breathing will soften again. One day, your mind will stop replaying the same wounds every night. One day, the darkness that currently feels endless will become a memory you survived. And when that day comes, you will finally understand how powerful it was that you refused to give up during the worst parts of your life. There is another kind of sadness people never talk about. The sadness of becoming unfamiliar to yourself. One day you wake up and realize life changed the way you laugh, changed the way you trust, changed the way you enter rooms, changed the way you look at people when they promise they will stay. Because experience teaches caution, and pain teaches distance. Not dramatic distance, quiet distance. The kind where you still answer messages, still smile politely, still function normally, but emotionally, you stand far away from everyone. That happens when the heart gets tired of disappointment, when somebody keeps giving loyalty to temporary people, when somebody keeps bleeding emotionally in silence while pretending everything is fine. And honestly, some people become addicted to pretending they are okay, pretending they are healing, pretending they no longer care. But late at night, the performance collapses. That is when the real thoughts arrive, the memories, the regrets, the invisible grief nobody else notices. And grief is strange. Sometimes you are not grieving a person. Sometimes you are grieving the version of yourself that existed before the pain happened. The softer version, the trusting version, the version that believed effort guaranteed loyalty. Life can take that innocence away quietly, not through one tragedy, but through repeated disappointment, repeated abandonment, repeated emotional exhaustion. After enough of that, the soul changes shape. You stop chasing attention. You stop begging people to understand you. You stop trying to explain wounds to people who never intended to listen deeply anyway. And strangely, that loneliness teaches wisdom. Painful wisdom, heavy wisdom, but wisdom. You begin understanding that everything in life moves. People move, feelings move, seasons move, pain moves. Nothing stays frozen forever, even when the night feels endless. That realization saved more people than motivation ever did. Because hope is not always loud. Sometimes hope is just quietly surviving until your emotions settle again. Sometimes hope is simply believing your current suffering is not permanent. And it is not. I know there are nights where sadness feels physical, where your chest tightens for no clear reason, where memories replay so intensely you feel trapped inside your own mind. I know there are moments where exhaustion becomes so deep, even speaking feels difficult, where smiling feels like labor, where existing feels heavier than it should. And yet, look at you. You are still here, still breathing, still enduring, still carrying weight that would mentally destroy many people. Do not underestimate that. Survival is not weak. Quiet endurance is not weak. Getting through another painful night without losing yourself completely is not weak. In fact, some of the strongest human beings are the ones nobody notices. The ones fighting silent battles while acting normal in public. The ones calming their own panic attacks privately. The ones crying quietly, then washing their face before speaking again. The ones carrying heartbreak without turning cruel. That takes strength. Real strength. Not the loud kind social media worships, the private kind. The kind built in darkness. And maybe one day, all the pain you survived will soften your heart instead of hardening it completely. Maybe one day the nights will feel lighter. Maybe one day your breathing will stop carrying so much pressure. Maybe one day you will sit alone in silence and finally feel peace instead of emotional war. But until then, be patient with yourself. Healing minds do not move in straight lines. Some nights hurt again. Some memories return again. Some wounds ache unexpectedly. That does not mean you failed. It means you are human. And humans recover slowly. So tonight, if your thoughts feel heavy, if your soul feels exhausted from carrying invisible pain, close your eyes for a moment and remember this quietly. Even the darkest emotional seasons eventually pass through the human heart. You know what truly terrifies people? Not darkness, not failure. Being emotionally seen. Because once somebody truly sees your pain, your fears, your loneliness, you become vulnerable. And vulnerability in this world can feel dangerous. That is why so many broken people hide behind humor, behind sarcasm, behind fake confidence, behind constant distraction. Because if they stop performing for even a moment, the sadness catches up. And some sadness is old, very old. The kind carried for years without words. Childhood disappointments, friendships that ended painfully, love that slowly became cold. Moments where you needed someone desperately and nobody came. People underestimate how long emotional abandonment stays inside the nervous system. A human being can physically leave a situation and still carry the emotional weight for years afterward. That is why healing is exhausting. You are not only fighting current pain, you are fighting accumulated pain, layer after layer, memory after memory. And eventually, the body starts reacting to everything. A message takes too long to arrive, your chest tightens. Somebody becomes distant, your mind prepares for loss immediately. A small disappointment happens, suddenly every old wound wakes up together. That kind of emotional fatigue is hard to explain, especially when people expect you to just move on. Move on where? The memories live inside the body, inside the breathing, inside the heartbeat, inside the silence between thoughts. But something important slowly happens during suffering. You begin understanding yourself differently. You notice your patterns, your fears, your emotional triggers, and painful self-awareness is still awareness. That matters. Because some people spend their entire lives running from themselves, distracting themselves, numbing themselves, pretending they feel nothing. But pain forces honesty, real honesty. The kind where you finally admit, yes, I am tired. Yes, I am hurt. Yes, this affected me more than I wanted to admit. And strangely, that honesty becomes the beginning of recovery. Not dramatic recovery, quiet recovery. The kind where you slowly stop abandoning yourself emotionally, where you stop insulting yourself for being sensitive, where you stop acting like your suffering is weakness. Because sensitivity is not weakness. Feeling deeply is not weakness. Crying privately is not weakness. The world only convinced people it was. But honestly, cold people are not always strong people. Sometimes they are simply wounded people who became emotionally numb from surviving too much. There is a difference, a very important difference. And maybe that is why kind souls suffer so intensely. They feel everything. The tone changes, the distance, the disappointment hidden inside small actions. They notice what others ignore, which means they also carry emotional weight others never even realize exists. That is exhausting. Living with a deep heart is exhausting. But do not hate yourself for it. Do not hate the part of you that still cares deeply even after pain. Because one day, that same heart will experience peace again too. Not permanent happiness, not a perfect life, just peace. Small moments where your chest finally relaxes again. Small moments where your mind becomes quiet again. Small moments where existing no longer feels like emotional survival. And those moments matter more than you know. Sometimes healing begins with tiny things. Sleeping peacefully for one night. Laughing genuinely for a few seconds. Going an entire evening without overthinking yourself into exhaustion. Tiny victories. Tiny signs your soul is recovering slowly. So please, be gentler with yourself during hard seasons. You are carrying invisible battles nobody else fully understands. And despite all of it, you are still here trying. That alone is proof that the darkness inside you has not won. After enough pain, a human being starts craving peace more than happiness. That changes everything. Because happiness is intense, temporary, loud. But peace is quiet. It is finally being able to breathe without your chest feeling tight all the time. It is going to sleep without fighting memories for 3 hours first. It is hearing your own thoughts without feeling attacked by them. People who never suffered deeply will never fully understand how valuable inner calm truly is, because they have never experienced mental chaos every single night. They have never felt the exhaustion of pretending to be okay while emotionally collapsing inside. They have never smiled during conversations while secretly feeling detached from everything around them. That kind of loneliness is difficult to describe, especially when surrounded by people. Sometimes, the loneliest humans are not isolated physically. They are simply emotionally unseen. Nobody notices the heaviness in their voice. Nobody notices how forced the laughter became. Nobody notices how tired their eyes look when silence returns. And eventually, they stop expecting anybody to notice, so they carry themselves quietly. Quiet suffering changes a person differently than dramatic suffering. Dramatic pain explodes outward. Quiet pain sinks inward. It settles inside the body, inside the nervous system, inside the breathing patterns, inside the way a person reacts to love, distance, attention, rejection. That is why emotional healing takes so long. You are not repairing thoughts only. You are repairing reactions, instincts, fears. You are teaching your body that it is safe to relax again. And honestly, that process is exhausting. Some days you feel strong. Some days one memory destroys your entire mood again. Some nights you think you healed, then suddenly the sadness returns heavier than expected. That does not mean you are broken forever. Healing is messy, very messy. People imagine recovery like climbing stairs upward, but emotional recovery feels more like surviving waves. One day calm, one day drowning, one day hopeful, one day emotionally numb. And through all of that, you still continue living somehow. That is resilience, not perfection, resilience. There is something deeply heroic about exhausted people who continue trying anyway. People rarely talk about that. They celebrate loud success, loud confidence, loud victories, but they ignore quiet courage. The courage to wake up after emotionally devastating nights. The courage to keep loving despite disappointment. The courage to remain soft in a world that rewards emotional coldness. That courage is rare, very rare. Because pain has a way of tempting people toward bitterness, toward emotional numbness, toward cruelty, toward shutting down completely. And honestly, some people never return from that darkness. They survive physically, but emotionally disappear. That is why protecting your heart matters. Not protecting it by becoming emotionless, no. Protecting it by learning balance, learning who deserves your energy, who deserves your trust, who deserves access to your inner world. Because not everyone deserves the deepest parts of you. Some people only know how to consume warmth, not protect it. And maybe realizing that is part of growing older emotionally. You stop trying to save everyone. You stop chasing validation from emotionally unavailable people. You stop begging for basic respect. You become quieter, more selective, more aware of how precious your peace actually is. And eventually, you begin understanding something powerful. Your worth was never determined by who abandoned you. Your value was never destroyed by who failed to appreciate you. Other people's inability to love correctly does not make you unlovable. Read that again inside your mind, because wounded people often blame themselves for the damage others caused. They think, maybe I was too much. Maybe I was not enough. Maybe if I changed myself more. No. Sometimes people simply lacked the emotional maturity to handle your heart carefully. That is their limitation, not your worth. And one day, when enough time passes, when enough healing happens quietly, you will stop seeing yourself through the eyes of people who hurt you. And maybe that is what growth truly is. Not becoming fearless, not becoming emotionless, but becoming capable of carrying pain without letting it define your entire identity anymore. Because for a long time, suffering can become addictive. Not enjoyable, just familiar. The human mind clings to familiar emotions, even painful ones. That is why some people replay heartbreak constantly, replay betrayal constantly, replay old conversations constantly. The pain becomes part of their routine, part of their personality, and eventually, they forget who they were before the sadness consumed everything. That is dangerous, very dangerous, because wounds are experiences, not identities. You experienced pain. You are not pain itself. There is a difference, a powerful difference. Sometimes healing begins the moment you stop worshiping your own suffering, the moment you stop treating sadness like the only honest emotion left inside you. Yes, you were hurt, deeply. Yes, certain memories still ache unexpectedly. Yes, some nights still feel unbearably heavy. But your life is larger than the worst thing that happened to you. Do not reduce your existence to trauma alone. You are still a human being beyond the damage, still capable of laughing genuinely, still capable of feeling warmth again, still capable of building moments that do not revolve around surviving emotionally. I know that can feel impossible sometimes, especially after long periods of loneliness, especially after trusting the wrong people repeatedly, especially after becoming emotionally exhausted from carrying invisible battles every day. But exhausted is not the same as finished. Weed that carefully inside your soul. Exhausted is not finished. Some people confuse temporary emotional darkness with permanent destruction. But human beings are more adaptable than they realize. The mind adjusts. The heart adjusts. Even broken routines slowly rebuild themselves over time. One day you suddenly notice you smiled naturally again. One day you realize an old memory no longer controls your mood the way it once did. One day silence stops feeling threatening and starts feeling peaceful again. Those moments arrive quietly. No dramatic music, no magical transformation. Just gradual softness returning to places inside you that once felt permanently damaged. And honestly, that quiet recovery is beautiful. Not flashy, not cinematic, but real. Very real. There is also something important many hurting people forget. Rest matters. Emotionally tired souls need rest, not constant pressure, not endless self-criticism, not non-stop comparison with stronger-looking people. Rest. Sometimes your heart is not failing. Sometimes it is simply overwhelmed. There is a difference. People speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to someone they love. You are weak. You should be over this already. You are falling behind. But healing does not obey deadlines. Pain does not disappear because society became impatient with it. A wounded mind heals in layers, slowly, quietly, humanly. And maybe the kindest thing you can do for yourself during difficult seasons is stop demanding perfection from a hurting soul. You are allowed to recover gradually. You are allowed to have bad nights again. You are allowed to feel confused sometimes, emotionally drained sometimes, lost sometimes. That does not erase your progress. It simply proves you are alive. Alive people struggle. Alive people grieve. Alive people overthink. Alive people break emotionally sometimes. And alive people heal too. Never forget that last part, because hopelessness lies to exhausted minds. It whispers, "This feeling will never end. You will always feel this empty. You will always carry this pain." But emotions are temporary visitors, even intense ones. That crushing sadness, temporary. That emotional numbness, temporary. That season where your chest feels heavy every night, temporary. It feels permanent only because you are currently inside it. Storms always feel endless from the middle of them. But eventually, the sky changes. The breathing softens. The mind quiets. The body unclenches little by little. And one morning, without warning, you realize you survived something you once believed would destroy you completely. Becoming is painful. Nobody explains that part honestly enough. People talk about transformation like it is beautiful, like growth arrives covered in confidence and clarity. But real growth often looks ugly first. It looks like confusion, isolation, sleepless nights, emotional exhaustion. It looks like sitting alone trying to understand why your soul suddenly feels disconnected from the life you once recognized. Because before a person changes, something inside them usually breaks first. An illusion, an attachment, an old identity, something collapses. And during that collapse, you feel lost. Not weak, lost. You begin questioning everything, your choices, your relationships, your purpose, your worth. And honestly, that stage terrifies people. Because human beings love certainty. Even painful certainty feels safer than unfamiliar healing. That is why some people stay emotionally trapped in the same cycles for years. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering became familiar. Familiar pain can feel strangely comforting. At least you know what to expect from it. But healing? Healing requires entering emotional territory you do not fully control yet. And that uncertainty feels frightening, especially when your trust was damaged before. Especially when life taught you that peace can disappear suddenly. Still, you cannot remain emotionally frozen forever. At some point, the soul gets tired of surviving the same wound repeatedly. It wants relief, real relief, not distraction, not temporary numbness, relief. That is why some exhausted people suddenly become quieter. Not because they stopped feeling, because they finally realize protecting their peace matters more than explaining their pain endlessly. There comes a moment where arguing drains you, over-explaining drains you. Trying to make emotionally unavailable people understand you drains you. So you stop, not out of hatred, out of self-preservation. And honestly, that quiet withdrawal saves many souls. Because not every battle deserves your emotional energy. Not every misunderstanding deserves your desperation. Not every person deserves access to your vulnerability. That lesson hurts to learn, but it protects you later. You start becoming more intentional with your attention, more careful with your heart, more aware of how deeply environments and people affect your inner state. And slowly, peace stops feeling boring. It starts feeling sacred. You begin appreciating simple things again. A calm evening, a quiet mind, a genuine conversation. A night where your thoughts finally allow you to rest. Small things. But emotionally exhausted people understand how valuable small peace truly is. Because they know what chaos feels like internally. They know what it feels like when the mind becomes a battlefield every night. And maybe that is why healed people become softer in certain ways. Not weaker, softer, more understanding, more patient, more compassionate toward hidden struggles. Because once you survive emotional darkness yourself, you start noticing pain inside others more easily too. The fake smiles, the tired eyes, the forced laughter, you notice it. And instead of judging it, you understand it. That understanding is powerful, very powerful. Because wounded people do not always need solutions. Sometimes they just need someone who understands the weight they are carrying without making them feel ashamed for it. And if nobody has told you this honestly recently, your emotions are not embarrassing. Your sadness is not weakness. Your exhaustion does not make you a failure. You are a human being carrying difficult experiences the best way you currently can. That deserves compassion, especially from yourself.